In 867, the Tune ship was discovered on the Nedre Haugen Farm near Fredrikstad in southeastern Norway, marking the first Viking ship excavated in the modern era. Since then, several Viking ships have been excavated from different places across the world. This includes the Goskstad ship in 1880, the Oseberg ship in 1906, and 5 vessels at Skuldelev in Roskilde fjord, Denmark, between 1957 and 1962. For the ecstatic excavators who discovered these ships, a couple of questions loomed large in their minds. What were the secrets of the Viking ships? What made these ships so formidable as instruments of war and trade, and exploration vessels, as described in the Viking sagas? To get to the root of the matter, we first need to grasp the basics of Viking ship design and what kind of ships they built. The Vikings primarily built 2 types of ships, the longship and the knar. Longships, or drakar, are approximately 65 feet long and resemble oversized rowboats with no covering to protect them from rain and ocean spray. They carried more than 30 men and were used for raiding and exploration. They were also double-ended, allowing for a reverse without the need to turn around. Knar, on the other hand, were smaller, about 50 feet long, and served as trading vessels. Unlike longships, they featured an enclosed hold for carrying bulky cargo and served to protect the cargo from the elements. The knars also typically had smaller crews, usually no more than 6 mariners. Of the 2 types of ships, the longships were the most important, as they were the only way the Vikings could sail far on the open ocean without sinking while exploring new lands. Their sharp bows sliced effortlessly through the waves, minimizing resistance, whether propelled by sail or oars. The design that they chose for the ship's hull offered even more advantages. Firstly, the length of the waterline was close to the vessel's overall length, with minimal overhangs. This design maximized the waterline length relative to the hull overall length, translating to faster potential speeds of up to 14 knots, allowing the Vikings to cover distances faster. Enhancing this design was the fact that the ships lacked any superstructures like enclosed spaces. This saved weight and made the ship even more agile. Moving at a fast speed would typically expose the ship to stability issues. To resolve this, the Vikings added flared beams, which helped distribute weight more evenly and enhanced the ship's ability to handle stress and pressure from various directions, such as waves and wind. The Vikings also designed the ships to have a low freeboard, meaning that the height of the deck from the waterline wasn't much. This reduced the boat's tendency to slide sideways when the wind was blowing from the side. Another advantage was the use of special keels that translated to shallow drafts for the ships. This allowed the crew to sail or row up rivers inaccessible to other European vessels, granting them a fantastic tactical advantage for exploration and surprise attacks. The Vikings could even beach the longships where no established harbors existed. In this way, the longship's design was a marvel to behold and definitely ahead of its time. However, this maneuverability came at a cost. Handling the vessel properly in rough seas required a highly skilled crew, and when this wasn't in place, it led to accidents in the ocean, which were quite common during the Viking Age. As for the knar, it differed from the longships in a couple of ways, but these differences made it stand out as a vessel for commerce among the Vikings. They were broader, wider, and deeper. They also relied more on its sail than the 2 or 4 oars it carried to aid in maneuvering when there was no wind on the open waters. Altogether, their design allowed it to accommodate more cargo and undertake longer, more perilous voyages. However, to accommodate this massive size, the knar weren't built for speed, limiting their distance covered to around 75 miles in a day, compared to the longships 400+ miles per day at top speed. Beyond the longship and knar, the Vikings had other less popular vessels like the færing, karvi, snekja, sked, and byrding. These ships had various uses ranging from fishing to transportation to warfare. Sadly, they're not often discussed as they're not typically considered part of the longship or knar categories. Having explored the awesomeness of Viking ship design, let's look into the materials they used and how they were built. Initially, Vikings relied heavily on oak for their longships. This prized wood offered exceptional strength and natural resistance to rot, making it ideal for enduring the harsh seas. Some estimates suggest that a single 65-foot longship required a staggering 2,000 cubic feet of oak, equivalent to roughly 11 mature oak trees. With time, the number of oak trees decreased faster than they could be replaced. The Viking shipbuilders were then forced to find a replacement and eventually opted for pine. Though it had the advantage of being lighter and easier to work with, it lacked oak strength and rot resistance. To battle this disadvantage and increase the durability and lifespan of pine-made ships, some evidence suggests that the Vikings pulled these ships entirely from the water when they were not in use and stored them in specialized boathouses. Whether it was pine or oak, Viking shipbuilders had a signature style of construction that differed significantly from the traditional method of building a ship around a pre-made internal skeleton. Viking shipbuilders began by splitting oak or pine tree trunks into long, thin strakes, using broad axes rather than saws. These strakes were then fastened with iron nails to a single, sturdy keel using a clever overlapping technique, where each plank slightly overlapped the one below it, creating a watertight seal further enhanced by caulking the seams with moss or animal hair coated in tar. Next, crossbeams were added to provide a deck and rowing benches, and a massive beam was secured along the keel to support the mast. For additional strength, Viking shipbuilders used wooden tree nails that cleverly swelled when wet, along with 3-inch iron rivets and round iron washers as fasteners. Attached to the ships were special sails, though none have been recovered from any excavations, leaving experts to speculate on their appearance based on Norse sagas and drawings. These sources suggest that the sails were made of wool and coated with animal fat and oils to prevent rotting. Beyond this, the actual look of the sails becomes more uncertain. Some carvings show an interlacing at the loose foot of a raised sail, which some experts believe was used to modify the sail's shape for optimal trim or to split air in strong winds. A crosshatch pattern seen on some depictions of sails has led to speculation that walrus hide was also sewn into the wool to add strength and maintain sail shape. Unlike modern ships with rudders, Viking ships relied on a large steering oar for navigation. This oar, positioned on the starboard side, right side of the ship, was a crucial tool for the helmsman, the person steering the vessel. The steering oar was secured to the ship's side by a fastening that passed through the hull and was tightly wrapped around the frame for stability. The helmsman would control the oar using a handle called a tiller. Pushing the tiller forward would cause the ship to turn to port or left, while pulling it back would turn it to the right. For most of these ships, construction was also far from plain. The higher the ship's status, the more elaborate the decorations, such as ornaments, dyed sails, and removable figureheads. These embellishments served purposes ranging from identification to intimidation. With all that's been said, you might think that Viking ships were only good as vessels for conquering the oceans. That couldn't be further from the truth. They also played a significant role in their elaborate burial rituals for wealthy Norsemen during the Viking Age. A long trench would be dug, and the ship would be carefully placed within and covered by a massive mound of earth. Meanwhile, the demised individual is buried in a chamber built or laid directly on the deck. In most cases, the deceased were not sent off alone. A number of items were placed with them. These could range from weapons and personal belongings to precious objects and even sacrificed animals. For example, during the excavation of the Oseberg ship, 2 women were found within, along with the remains of nearly 24 decapitated horses. Amazingly, this practice, though barbaric, is why many Viking ships could be found and excavated, as the burial mounds that contained these ships were mostly on land. Today, many of these ships can still be seen in museums in Norway, some restored with similar materials to preserve their grandeur. Archaeologists are still discovering more remains of Viking ships, although there are no guarantees they will eventually be excavated, due to the enormous expense incurred from such a project.